I always thought Emily and I were one of those rare couples who actually had it all. 10 years of marriage, no kids by choice, good jobs, and mutual respect. Friends would joke that we were the kind of couple who still looked at each other with stars in their eyes. It was the kind of relationship that gave others hope. Or at least that's what I believed. We had a house we both loved, modern and peaceful, away from the rush of the city. Emily was a curator at an art gallery downtown, and I ran a small but successful consulting firm. We both enjoyed having our own space and respected each other's independence. Maybe that's why it took me so long to realize what was happening. Looking back, maybe I'd grown complacent, too trusting of the life we'd built together. Then things started to change. It was subtle at first. Emily began spending a little extra time away, calling it work stuff. She was always dedicated to her job, so I didn't question it, not at first. But then she'd be late, claiming she was at gallery events or visiting a new artist's studio for an upcoming exhibit. She even took a weekend trip on short notice, saying her boss needed her to secure an artist in another state. Normally, she'd be thrilled to tell me about new projects, but this time, when I'd ask, she'd shrug and change the topic. The final straw that pricked my suspicion was how guarded she became with her phone. Emily had never hidden anything from me, so the way she started flipping her phone screen down on the table or excusing herself to answer calls felt like a slap I didn't understand. But even then, I pushed down the nagging feeling. I was her husband. I trusted her. It wasn't until the evening I found her sitting in our living room, lost in thought, that the feeling became impossible to ignore. She looked startled, as if she'd been caught doing something wrong, even though I hadn't said a word. I stood there, watching her scramble for an excuse, and for the first time in our marriage, it struck me that I might not actually know her anymore. Over the next few weeks, things just unraveled. I'd tell myself I was being paranoid, but every time I looked at her, there'd be that spark of guilt in her eyes, so quick it might have been my imagination. She'd be typing away on her phone in bed and stop abruptly when I walked in, shoving it under her pillow like a teenager with something to hide. I asked her, gently at first, "Everything good at work, Em? You seem a bit distant." "Oh, it's just the gallery's going through some changes," she'd say, waving it off. "We're trying to secure a big artist, and it's stressing everyone out." I wanted to believe her, so I did, but it didn't explain the odd smell of cologne on her clothes or the messages she'd check late at night. When I asked again, she grew defensive, accusing me of trying to control her. "Do you want to check my phone? Are we that kind of couple now?" she asked, her tone sharp and unyielding. "No," I replied, even though the words stung. "I just miss you, that's all." I thought that'd smooth things over. We'd had fights before and always patched things up, but this time was different. The argument was never truly resolved. It hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear, polluting everything between us. One night, she was up late, saying she was too restless to sleep. I followed her to the living room, catching a glimpse of her phone screen reflecting in the window, and saw she was messaging someone with a heart next to their name. My stomach turned to stone. I fought down the nausea, creeping back to our bedroom before she noticed me. That night, I couldn't sleep at all, my mind racing, questions clawing at me. Who was it? How long had this been going on? Over the next few days, I began to notice even more. A new wardrobe was creeping in: sophisticated dresses, lacy blouses, clothes she never used to wear, all with the tags from high-end stores I didn't recognize. She spent longer in front of the mirror, perfecting her makeup with a kind of concentration that felt intimate, as if she were imagining herself in someone else's eyes. I started asking questions more directly. "Emily, are you meeting someone new for work?" I asked one evening as she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her hair. She hesitated, her eyes darting away from mine. "Jason, you're being ridiculous," she said. "You're just imagining things." It was a poor lie, but I let her believe I was buying it. The pieces began to fall into place one night at a mutual friend's birthday party. Emily was seated across the room, talking to some old friends from college, while I found myself at the bar. I struck up a conversation with Sam, a friend from back in our university days, who seemed equally surprised to see me alone. "You hear about Lucas coming back?" he asked casually, sipping his drink. The name hit me like a punch to the gut, though I did my best to mask it. "No, I hadn't," I replied, forcing myself to sound casual. "Where's he been?" Sam chuckled. "Off traveling, I think. Got his life sorted out or whatever, but now he's back, probably looking to reconnect with people." I managed to smile and pretended to be uninterested, but my mind was buzzing. Lucas. He was the infamous ex-boyfriend, the one Emily had told me about a few times, with a kind of wistful regret in her eyes that used to make me uncomfortable. They'd met in college, dated seriously for years, and even talked about marriage before calling it quits. According to her, they'd both been too young and unprepared for commitment, and the relationship ended on decent terms. I'd never met the guy, but even then I'd known he left a mark on her. That night, as we drove home, Emily was quieter than usual. She seemed lost in thought, tapping away on her phone when she thought I wasn't watching. I remembered Sam's words and the way she'd spoken about Lucas before. Suddenly, all her recent behavior, the secrecy, the lies, the guarded phone started to make perfect, undeniable sense. The next day, while Emily was in the shower, I unlocked her phone. It was a risky move, but the silence between us had been gnawing at me. And there it was, a text thread with L. It wasn't a name, but the conversation confirmed everything I dreaded. He was back. All right. She'd been meeting him on her late nights. My chest tightened as I scrolled through their exchange, seeing the words "missed you" and "old feelings" appear like landmines. There was no mention of leaving me, no explicit declaration of her intentions, but I could feel the current under those messages. It was the kind of love that hadn't died, just gone dormant, waiting for the right time to surface. She hadn't ended things with me yet, hadn't pulled the trigger, but it was clear she was standing on the precipice. As she came out of the bathroom, I quickly put her phone down and pretended to be reading an email on my own. But inside, I was reeling. That night, lying beside her, feeling the warmth of her body, yet knowing she was already half gone, I knew I had a choice to make. I could confront her, demand an explanation. But something in me wanted more than an argument. I wanted her to feel the depth of betrayal she was putting me through. So I made a promise to myself in that moment I wouldn't just watch her walk away. I would make sure that when she left, she'd leave with nothing but regret. After that night, something hardened in me. The person I was before, the trusting husband, the doting partner, felt like a distant memory. I became someone else, calculating, precise, and driven. I wasn't interested in giving her a chance to twist the story, so I wouldn't confront her, not yet. If she was going to throw away our marriage, I'd ensure she'd regret it. Every text, every lie would be documented. For the next few weeks, I kept tabs on her like a private investigator. I was careful, hiding my moves, learning to act as if I were the same clueless husband she thought I was. I felt like I was living two lives, one where I smiled, laughed, and played the part, and another where I watched every step she took, cataloging each piece of her betrayal. I started with her phone. I'd memorized the passcode from the time I'd unlocked it in a moment of desperation. She often left it charging while she was in the shower or while she made coffee in the mornings, and I'd use those brief moments to sift through her messages with Lucas, taking screenshots and storing them on a secure drive under lock and key. Each exchange was like a knife in my side, reading things like "you always made me feel alive and we had something real, didn't we?" The worst messages were the ones where she compared me to him. She'd talk about how much she'd changed to fit into this life with me, that she missed the version of herself she was with Lucas. In one particularly painful message, she admitted that being with me felt safe but stagnant. She told him she wanted the passion they used to have, the excitement, the thrill. I'd once believed those were words she used to describe me, but I was starting to realize I'd just been the placeholder she settled for when things didn't work out with him. After a few weeks, the texts weren't enough. I wanted more. I began to collect financial documents, not just the joint accounts, but every investment and asset tied to our names. I'd always been the one to handle most of our finances, so it wasn't hard to create backups of everything and set up safeguards she wouldn't know existed. I knew if this ended in divorce, she'd be in for a surprise when she saw how much I'd separated from our joint assets, legally of course, but in a way that would leave her with next to nothing. Then there were the photographs. On one of her late work nights, I followed her. I kept my distance, parking a few blocks away and watching her meet him outside a restaurant. They hugged, standing close enough that it was clear they'd crossed a line. I took photos from a distance, capturing every second, watching as my wife of 10 years threw away the life we'd built in the arms of a man who'd already left her once. I wasn't just building a case against her in case of a divorce. I was planning my own escape and exit strategy so flawless that when I left, I'd leave her stranded in the hollow life she'd created. I wanted her to look around one day, realize what she'd lost, and feel the weight of her choices crashing down on her. I spent hours at night, after she'd fallen asleep, copying financial records, detailing every asset, every investment, every debt. I funneled portions of our savings into accounts she couldn't touch, under my name only. She was financially dependent on me in ways she probably never realized. When she found herself cut off, I knew the impact would hit hard. I didn't care about being fair anymore. She'd forfeited that right the moment she decided to betray me. I also made appointments with a divorce lawyer, asking for strategies that could ensure I walked away with what I wanted. I didn't mention her infidelity. I wanted to keep that trump card to myself, saving it for the moment when it would hurt the most. Then I began to prepare the house. I knew the day I left her, I'd be leaving her with nothing but memories, each carefully chosen item, each reminder of what she'd lost. I sifted through our things, leaving out old photos, anniversary gifts, and even the small love notes we used to write each other, slipping them into places she'd find after I was gone. I wanted her to remember each loving moment and feel the sharp pang of regret as she stood alone in an empty house, surrounded by the life she'd destroyed. One evening, I went into the garage and found a box labeled Memories. It was a collection of everything from our relationship, movie tickets from our first date, postcards from our honeymoon, silly notes we'd left for each other over the years. I carefully spread these items around the house, the movie ticket in her jewelry drawer, the postcard on the kitchen counter, one of her notes in the nightstand. I wanted to make it impossible for her to escape the memory of what she'd thrown away. The night of the confrontation felt like a storm gathering. I could sense it building, feel the tension thickening with each passing moment. Emily came home later than usual, makeup slightly smudged, her hair tousled. She looked tired but wore that same guilty expression that had been haunting her face for weeks. I waited until she'd settled down in the living room, sipping a glass of wine, her phone forgotten on the coffee table. Taking a deep breath, I walked over and sat down across from her. I could see the moment she sensed something was wrong, the slight tension in her shoulders, the way she shifted in her seat. "We need to talk, Emily," I said, my voice low but steady. She put down her wine glass, her eyes widening just slightly. "Jason, is everything okay?" I stared at her, feeling the anger boiling beneath the surface. "I know about Lucas." The color drained from her face, and her mouth opened slightly in shock. What? What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone and tapped open the photos, the ones of her meeting him outside the restaurant, the text I'd screenshotted, the emails. I laid it all out in front of her, letting each image, each line of conversation tell the story she tried so hard to hide. Her mouth opened and closed, her hands trembling as she reached for her wine glass again. "Jason, this isn't what it looks like." "Oh, isn't it?" I laughed bitterly. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like you're seeing him behind my back." Tears began to fill her eyes, but I'd anticipated this reaction. I knew she'd try to turn it on me, make me the villain for digging into her privacy, for collecting evidence, as if I were some sort of obsessed stranger instead of her husband. But I stayed calm, my voice barely a whisper. "Save the tears, Emily. I'm done with the lies." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away, the thought of her touch making my skin crawl. She stammered, trying to find words that would explain everything away. "Jason, please, it's not." I was confused. "Lucas and I, we were just talking about old times. I didn't mean for it to go this far." The anger flared in me again. "Do you think I'm stupid, Emily? I read your messages. Every line about how alive he makes you feel, how you missed the thrill of being with him, how I was nothing but safe but stagnant." My voice rose, each word dripping with venom. "Is that all I am to you, Emily? Just a placeholder?" She broke down then, sobbing, covering her face with her hands. "Jason, please. I made a mistake, okay? I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't think." "That's exactly it. You didn't think," I said, my voice a deadly calm. "You didn't think about the years we spent together, the sacrifices I made for you. All the times I was there for you, all the promises we made. You threw it all away for a fling with someone who left you once already. Do you honestly think he's not going to leave again?" She sobbed harder, her body racked with guilt and regret, but I didn't care. I felt cold, detached, as if I were watching this all from a distance. "You should know I've spoken to a lawyer," I told her, and her head snapped up, her face pale with horror. "By the time I leave, you'll be left with nothing. No home, no savings. I've already taken care of everything. This life you so easily discarded, it's gone, Emily. You're going to have to start over." She reached for me again, desperate, begging for another chance. But I stood up, looking down at her one last time, feeling only a dull ache where my love for her had once been. "Goodbye, Emily," I said, my voice final. "I hope he was worth it." I left her in that empty house, surrounded by the memories of everything she'd destroyed. Walking out of that door, I felt a strange sense of liberation, as if a weight I hadn't known I'd been carrying had finally lifted. The life I'd known was over. But somehow, for the first time in weeks, I felt free. The next few days were a blur as I settled into my new reality, staying with a friend until I could find a place of my own. It was strange, leaving behind a life I'd built over the past decade, but each morning as the fog lifted, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. I had closed off every financial avenue that tied Emily to me. All the assets she'd counted on our joint accounts, investments, the house were under my name. I hadn't left her completely destitute. She had her own account, enough to manage for a few months, but anything beyond that was off limits. Emily, who had relied on my financial planning and stability, was now on her own. The messages began almost immediately. At first, she tried calling, leaving voicemails that grew increasingly frantic as each day passed with no response. She left dozens of texts, trying every tactic she could think of: regret, pleading, anger. She apologized for everything, claiming she'd been confused, that Lucas meant nothing to her, that she wanted to work things out. She even tried to accuse me of abandoning her with no warning, but the evidence I'd left behind, the photos and the messages she'd sent Lucas, shattered any defense she could mount. After a few days, my friend suggested I block her. "There's no point in torturing yourself by reading these," he said, "unless you're actually considering going back." I assured him that was the last thing I wanted. Still, I kept reading her messages, not because I wanted to go back, but because I wanted to see the evolution of her regret. It was like watching a slow implosion, each message another stage of her spiraling realization of what she'd lost. When the texts begging for forgiveness and promising to be better faded into silence, she resorted to emails. I opened one late one night, curiosity getting the better of me. "Jason, please, I'm begging you. Just talk to me. I know I messed up, but please, give me a chance to make things right. Lucas was a mistake, a stupid fantasy. I know now what we had was real, what we built together was real. I was just scared, maybe a little bored. And I thought I needed excitement. But I was wrong. You were everything I needed, everything I could ever want. Please don't give up on us." I closed the email without responding. Her words, so drenched in desperation, felt hollow. She'd reduced our life together to something that bored her, discarded at the moment something shiny and new came along. Now, faced with the reality of life without me, she wanted to return to the safe harbor she'd taken for granted. But the thing was, I was no longer her safe harbor. I wasn't hers at all. In the weeks that followed, I began piecing together my life again, slowly and intentionally, but without the weight of betrayal hanging over me. I moved into a new apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture. It was a blank slate, devoid of memories, a place where I could finally start fresh. I focused on myself in ways I hadn't for years. I joined a gym, reconnected with friends, and even began exploring new hobbies I'd set aside during our marriage. It was strange, at first, navigating a world where I was no longer part of a couple. But I felt lighter, free from the unspoken compromises and limitations that had once framed my world. Eventually, I started dating again. It wasn't serious, just casual dinners and movie nights, but I found myself enjoying the simplicity of getting to know someone without the shadow of Emily's betrayal. It was a reminder that life was bigger, richer, than I'd allowed myself to imagine during my years with her. My friends, who'd been hesitant to take sides during the divorce, came around too. They'd seen the wreckage Emily had left, the way she tried to spin the story to save face, but the truth had a way of revealing itself. People saw through her lies, and in time, most of our mutual friends reached out to me, offering support and invitations. I accepted their offers, grateful to move on with a life that had no place for betrayal. Months passed, and as winter set in, I'd all but forgotten about Emily. Her calls had stopped, her emails had dwindled, and I'd finally begun to put her behind me. Then, one evening, as the first snow fell, I received a letter from her in the mail. It was handwritten, her careful script filling 3 pages. I poured myself a drink, sat by the window, and began to read. "Jason, I've spent months trying to understand what I did, to figure out why I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me. At first, I wanted to blame you. I wanted to say you weren't enough, that you didn't excite me the way I needed. But I know that's a lie. You were more than enough. It was me. I was selfish, shallow, chasing some idea of passion without realizing how empty it was. I see that now. I see the life we had, the stability, the love, and how I took it all for granted. I missed the mornings with you, our late-night talks, the comfort of knowing someone truly understood me. Lucas was. He was just a ghost, a memory I was clinging to out of some twisted nostalgia. He didn't love me the way you did. He didn't know me the way you did. I was a fool to think he could ever fill the place you had in my life. I know I don't deserve anything from you. But I needed you to know that I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry for all the pain I caused, for the trust I shattered. I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I'll regret losing you, losing us. I only hope that someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Yours, Emily. I put the letter down, feeling nothing but a dull ache. Her words, dripping with regret, should have affected me more, but I felt strangely numb. This wasn't the apology I'd once craved, it was just confirmation of something I'd known for a long time. She was sorry, yes, but only because she'd lost the comfort and security she'd come to depend on. It wasn't about love or redemption, it was about regret. I folded the letter and put it away, feeling no need to respond. Emily would have to live with her choices, with the memories she'd desecrated and the life she'd broken. She'd have to live with the silence she'd created, the echo of a life she could never reclaim. As for me, I was finally free. Free from her, free from the weight of betrayal, free from the emptiness that had once defined our marriage. In a strange way, her betrayal had liberated me, showing me a life I'd never have chosen on my own, but was grateful to embrace. I was no longer her safe but stagnant placeholder, I was my own person again. The next morning, I left my apartment, locking the door behind me as I stepped out into the crisp, cold air. The past felt distant, a chapter one finally closed, and as I walked into the brightness of the day, I felt the quiet comfort of a new beginning. Emily would spend her life looking back, haunted by what she'd lost. But me? I'd only look forward, unburdened and ready to finally live.